This hour, that's the announcement that Zimbabwe's new president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, has named the former army chief who led a coup that ended Robert Mugabe's 37-year rule as one of his deputies in the ruling party. Now, that statement coming from the presidential press secretary saying that General Constantino Chiwenga, alongside long-serving State Security Minister Kembo Mohadi, were appointed as Mnangagwa's deputies in the ZANU-PF party with immediate effect. And now, to talk more on this, let's welcome Dr. Martin Rupiya. He is a political analyst from the Department of African Renaissance Studies at the University of South Africa, UNISA. Dr. Rupiya, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, when you look at these appointments, Doc, are these two being rewarded by the new president, or do they really deserve their posts?
There are two aspects that I think we can draw from the appointments that have been made today. The president, in fact, on the first appointment of General Chiwenga, indicated 2 days ago that he had retired General Chiwenga as a prelude to his appointment. Now, we have to acknowledge that many Zimbabweans have cheered and accepted the role played by General Chiwenga in moving the country from the old regime to what some of us are beginning to call the new Zimbabwe. He played a critical role in that, transformation. And going forward, they followed the constitution in which he has been retired from the armed forces and also located within the political structure. And one hopes he continues to provide the leadership and the service that many Zimbabweans have really acknowledged and have been given a new Christmas, as it were. On the second part, for former Minister Kembo Mohadi, in my view, the country has followed the traditional balancing between Matabeleland in the western part of the country, ZANU and ZAPU, which were the two parties fighting for liberation struggle. And on 22nd December, it is now a traditional norm for Zimbabweans to celebrate Unity Day. Mm-hmm. And that unity is given a voice and manifestation in the appointments of two vice presidents. One, of course, representing what I have, indicated, but the other deliberately acknowledging the role and contribution of Western Matabeleland and ZAP. So I think the two appointments that have been made have significance in the new context, but also have tended to respond to the traditional reflection of unity that has always been in place.
Now, when you look at these positions and what has been the state of ZANU-PF until recently, do you think that these appointments will usher in a new sense of unity, or is it just the new president trying to build up and reinforce his faction within the party?
I think overall we have to give caution and cause and credit to the performance so far since November 24th, whatever, when the transition was made. This is less than 3 weeks. And in my view, there's been a deliberate move to unite and reconcile Zimbabweans. We have saw yesterday one white farmer being handed back his farm, and the policies that have been adopted and passed through Parliament in a very rapid fashion indicate that we now have a very serious group of leadership that is concerned with the prosperity and livelihoods of all ordinary Zimbabweans. And they have moved very quickly to look at and change the indigenous laws, to invite investors to come in to create jobs. So in my view, what they've done so far in less than 4 weeks, I think is credit And I'm hoping that the appointment of the two vice presidents, which has been a process which had been delayed, is simply going to aid and complement what we have seen so far.
And what would you say, Doc, then to some of those that say, when you look at the state of ZANU-PF and the current overlooking of more senior leaders, for instance, Simon Kayamoyo, is this not a recipe then for further ructions and divisions within the party?
In a way, the roles that are played by Simon Kayamoyo and others have not necessarily been overlooked, but I think we have to understand some of it had been quite negative. But to point out to the new team that is being put into place, one hopes, of course, they have the task which they've announced quite publicly to go for some of the criminal elements. But overall, I think they are trying to bring in a sense of purpose, transparency, and accountability, and moving the whole country forward. And so there have been people that have been in power for a number of years, nearly more than 30 years. And maybe it's time to begin to switch to a model that not only takes into account the huge experience that some of the old leaders offer, but also begin to open space for young and aspiring new blood to come in and to learn under the leadership in taking, the country forward.
And could there be any chance at all, Dr. Rupiya, of the so-called Generation 40 cabal reuniting under another banner and becoming a threat to ZANU-PF at some stage?
That point cannot be dismissed, and that is why I think we must offer some advice to the new administration to maintain some sense of vigilance, and also even ordinary Zimbabweans. What we would like to see is a leadership that takes the country onto a different level, and I think we are getting that sense from the current leadership. Zimbabweans had been abused, Zimbabweans had been forced outside their own country into diaspora, Zimbabweans had been made jobless. I mean, there's a high, percentage of unemployment and a lack of leadership and even planning in a modern, society and modern world. And I think we now must acknowledge that we have a team in place that must be given an opportunity to find and create policies that respond directly to the situation of the most vulnerable, Zimbabweans. So going forward, yes, there is a possibility that the G40, which was the Generation 40, abbreviation, may continue to regroup and seek to undermine what is taking place. But there's also been very active action in looking towards some of the old ministers. The old Minister for Agriculture, for example, has just been found, with tractors and seeds, sitting on their farm. So that type of exercising the negative elements of the past must continue to expose completely for the single reason that we must never again as Zimbabweans allow such a situation that undermines our own destiny and prosperity going forward.
And the new president this week was also on an official visit to Pretoria, meeting with President Jacob Zuma and also meeting with the Zimbabwean diaspora in South Africa and urging them to go back home, saying that Zimbabwe is open for business. Now, in your view, do you think this call will be heeded by Zimbabweans, not just in South Africa, but scattered across the world?
In fact, I can tell you, O'Brien, that the call for Zimbabweans to come forward and listen to the president making the call to come and rebuild Zimbabwe, which he had started in his State of the Nation address in Parliament in Harare before coming to Pretoria, surprised the president and his team. There was such an overwhelming response. There's an appetite out there for people in diaspora, black, white, Chinese, green, whatever Zimbabweans who would like to go back and make a serious contribution towards, taking the country forward. So the bottom line was that the president and his team were surprised at the response. And I think the policy he has put forward has resonance in Washington, in New York, in London, in Sydney, and other places. I think it's important that the country remains open for business. We now have admittance by the Zimbabwe Republic Police that we made serious mistakes in their relationship with society. And so the rule of law, accountability and transparency must be norms in the respect of human rights, norms that are going to take the new Zimbabwe going forward. This has resonated far beyond the borders of Zimbabwe and is going to benefit the country going forward.
All right, we have to end it there, but thank you so much for your time there. That was Dr. Martin Rupiya, political analyst from the Department of African Renaissance Studies at the University of South Africa, that's UNISA. Now, a tropical storm has caused widespread devastation in the southern Philippines. Some 9